What's up, y'all? So in this video I want to talk about skin tone blindness. TikTok, there's a lot to talk about, like eyebrow blindness, hair blindness, things like that. So I definitely feel like sometimes there's a level of like skin tone blindness in not only the Black community but the Hispanic community as well, and that also tends to play in. And I've briefly like touched on this multiple times throughout the years, but never done like a specific video like really addressing why this is something that I've mentioned more than once, because I could see how it could maybe seem like coming out of left field, like why would I be mentioning this, but in my opinion there is an important reason as to why, like, even though I make content specifically talking about like the light skin and mixed experience, I still think that it's important to like be clear about but also have the understanding and the empathy to know that there's ranges to these like skin colors. So I do recognize and agree with that, and also have that perspective as well, but I also do think a lot of intellectual dishonesty used in order to, make a certain point for, or make a certain exception, or set up a certain narrative, in scenarios. And that's a huge issue I have. And I don't know if that's been like clear in what I've been trying to depict in my content. Like, that's an ongoing theme I've tried to point out, but I don't know if that's being conveyed. So I just kind of want to say that like clearly, like that is the angle that I'm taking. Basically, it's propaganda connected to skin tone, and in the last like 7 years or so, we're really seeing this come to head. And these are long held beliefs and stereotypes that many of them are rooted in Jim Crow times, or like, just racist media in the past. And then over the last 70 years or so, as Black people have had our own media, just adapting and promoting these images on a larger scale and putting them into modern form, and putting our own spin and perspective onto it. And that's really catching up to us now when it comes to skin color. And I think that dark skinned women have done a really good job in addressing that and realizing that within the last 5 years, 3-5 years, they've been really successful in addressing that. And it's with them addressing that, it's also helped me to realize and see things, whether it have been for positive or negative reasons. It also did help for me to come to certain conclusions about, my identity and where I fall in, Black womanhood as well. And it made me have to address and unpack these things about my family history, and being highly admixed and multiracial, multicultural, and things like that. So it even opened up an idea in my head, to where I'm like, okay, well, to a degree, light-skinned people are going to have to come, have this kind of awakening or a sense of awareness as well as I did, since I come from a mixed family, MGM family. Like, my family, both my parents are Black, but we're just highly admixed, basically, like 60-35 type shit. So, because that's my family history, and I grew up with a lot of different diverse like skin tones of family members and things like that, even though luckily I didn't really have to deal with colorism or skin tone politics in my family, because I grew up in a family that was like very visibly diverse, and a lot of people in my family do look racially or ethnically ambiguous. I did have a lot of like kind of weird experiences growing up, and I did observe a lot of stuff growing up. I observed how people reacted differently, or positively or negatively, to light skin or dark skin people, or how people acted when they saw, my little brother who's dark skinned with, very sleek, straight hair, or how people reacted to my grandmother who's racially ambiguous. Like, I made all these observations, and I had these experiences growing up, and that shaped my perspective towards race and skin tone and nationality and all that good stuff. And so that's why when I have these, like, even though I understand there's ranges to skin color, there's ranges to what's dark skin, there's ranges to what's light skin and things like that, I still do think that it is important to keep some intellectual consistency when we're having these conversations, especially if you're going to hold specifically light skin and mixed people to these very strict standards and rules for just us personally. Nobody else has rules. But then like you get to have these intellectually dishonest talking points and double speak and, you know, logic that doesn't track or make any sense, and that's sometimes harmful. You know, it's an imbalanced dynamic. So I don't want a light-skinned version of what happened, in the sense that now people are using that as a scapegoat in a way to maybe stereotype light-skinned people in a certain way. I don't want to do the same thing in reverse. But at the same time, I do think it was really good that dark-skinned women did start to push back on the narratives about them. And I do think that in a way, light-skinned people should do the same thing, specifically light-skinned women, but in a healthy way. Both groups have to figure out how to do that in a healthy way. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. But that's my focus is about narratives and like propaganda and cultural ideas about skin color and things, and how harmful they are, and how that connects with like women's issues. That's been like the main focus of what I've been trying to do on this channel. And so I want to just give a few quick examples of like what I'm talking about and where these scenarios are relevant. So the first example, and why I think it's important to be somewhat clear about these categories and like what we're talking about, and that I feel like there's a level of intellectual dishonesty that people have. It's not as confusing as people try to make it seem, I feel like. And so like growing up in a mixed family has impacted like how I view skin tone, and as well as like skin tone politics, and do I feel like the public like reacts to Black people that have different skin tones. And like some of the obvious ways I noticed this was because I've spoken about this in other videos, was that like in the summertime I would go to this major Midwestern city that my family's from that's predominantly Black. It's very segregated. I won't say the city though, but I would go there, and you know, again, as I've said, my family is mixed, and we're all different phenotypes. We all look alike, but we're all different like skin colors, phenotypes. Some people look, you know, more on the African side. Some people look more on the mixed side, more ambiguous. You know, it varies. But anyway, I always noticed that like in this specific city where I would travel to, where it was pretty much only like Black people and white people, very segregated from each other, like the way people will react to my family, specifically my family members that were very ambiguous or very light. And I want to make this very clear, because often when we hear about people talk about colorism, it's usually in a comparison way, like, oh, they mistreated this person and elevated this other person. And, you know, it's always in this like one person being put down or elevated type of way. But that's not really how I noticed it. How I mostly noticed it was just that, like, I just feel like they got a lot of attention, honestly. Like, to the point where, I'm gonna be honest with you, as a child, I had a lot of social anxiety going out with my family, particularly my cousins that were like teenagers and young adults at that time, because of the level of like harassment attention, particularly the women and girls. And I feel like in the early 2000s, like the catcalling and harassment was way worse. And like there were a lot of situations when me and my cousins, mind you, I was a little girl at this time. I was under 10 years old. And my cousins were ranging between, you know, like middle school age, like up until like 16, 17. So we would all be together. You know how you do with your cousins. We go out in the summer to the pool and stuff like that. And like my cousins would just get relentlessly harassed, like all the time. And like we had been chased home before, followed. And like as a little girl, that can be very scary. Like we would be followed in the mall. We would be followed home. Guys in cars would force my cousins to talk to them, like, you know, block our way to talk to them, stuff like that. And I just didn't notice that when I would be with my parents, who are both brown skinned. To give y'all an idea how my parents look, they look like Pam Grier and I don't know, maybe Andre 3000. Like, even though they're both like 60% African, 40% European, they both came out looking very, you know, monoracially Black. They look like African Americans who are brown skin. I don't know. But when I would be with my parents or my other family members who look like my parents, I don't remember feeling like noticing that level of like attention or harassment. But when I would be with my light-skinned family members or my ambiguous family members, I remember that a lot. But in New York City, where I grew up, it was a completely different dynamic. And when they would come to New York City, they wouldn't have that experience, and we wouldn't get harassed like that because it's more diversity. So that's really how I noticed that black people were very color struck, honestly. And then the second way I really noticed this was when my younger brother was born. And to give y'all an idea of his phenotype, in the Caribbean, we have like something that we call like a coolie. And some people say it's a derogatory term. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't really know. But basically, a coolie is basically somebody who's a mixture of like Indian and black. And so I'm gonna put some pictures on the screen. But anyway, my brother came out looking very much like a coolie. Like, we don't have any Indian in us, to my knowledge. Like, we are Caribbean, but we don't have any Indian in us. And I'm not talking about Native American. I'm talking about Indian from the continent of Asia, Asian Indians, like there is in Trinity or Jamaica. You know what I mean? So that's how my brother came out looking. And so anyway, as a baby and even as a toddler, he would just get mad attention from people and like, positive attention. Like, he was a really cute baby, like, beautiful hair, very slick, loose curls, very, very rich, dark chocolatey skin. Like, he has a very like foreign phenotype. Like, he does not look like a lot of people at all. Like, to this day, I don't see people just walking around looking like my brother. And people would always like make comments about the way he looked and everything. And I'm not gonna lie, as a kid, like, I was really proud of the way he looked. Like, I would like definitely like parade him around a lot, and like I always want to hold him, take pictures with him, things like that. Like, like when he was born, like I was like so happy. Like, I felt like so special to have a brother who looked like that and things. So I also don't like the narrative that every time, or that all mixed or light-skinned families, like, that they're intentionally trying to do that in a negative way, or that they that they might mistreat, the darker kids or make them feel left out. And don't get me wrong, in some families that does happen, and some families do have color issues. I'm not denying that. But in my family, that was not the case. In fact, he actually got a lot of attention and a lot of praise because he looked different than the rest of us, and nobody really looked like him. And I have another aunt that looks like that too, and it's the same thing with her. So we really kind of like look at them as special because they're the only people who look like that. But anyway, so like, or going around the world, he would get a lot of positive attention, and people asking if he could be a baby model and stuff like that. But at the same time, I always noticed that people would always point out like, oh, he looks so different from you guys, he don't look like anybody in the family, like like, and facial structurally wise, he does look like me and my family, and my whole family facial structure wise, we look alike. We're just different skin tones and hair textures, but people are dense. So anyway, like I always also just felt like, if people who are considered dark skinned, if they're living the same experience as these brown skinned people that are the majority in the black community, I don't see why people would feel the need to point out that my brother looked different than us. Because even though I'm light skinned and so is another brother of ours, I've never been told that I don't look like my parents who are brown skinned. I've never been told that they're surprised that we're related. Even in school, kids would tell my siblings that they're surprised that they're related to my brother because none of them look alike. And like, they would always just kind of single him out and say, oh, you don't look like them and things like that. So that would just, I always just took note of that. Stuff like that. So that's why when I'm saying, like, it might seem like I'm nitpicky, because I've made a few community posts, and even in other videos I mentioned how like I don't feel like Normani's like really like that dark skin. I feel like y'all are like doing too much low-key, like by trying to make it seem like Normani's like some type of like face of being dark skinned. Like, I don't really agree with that. Like, I don't agree with that, because like my dad's around Normani shade, and like people always are like, oh my gosh, y'all look so different than my little brother, and I just don't understand that. So it's like, I kind of disagree. I feel like y'all treat actual dark skinned people really differently than y'all treat and y'all react to brown skinned people, but then y'all like to pretend that brown skinned people are the same as dark skinned people, and I don't really like that, because y'all do the same thing with light skinned people. Y'all treat light skinned and ambiguous people differently than y'all treat brown skinned people who are the majority. And I'm not saying this out of any disrespect or hate. Clearly I was raised by brown skinned people, but the reality is that in America, in the United States, brown skin monoracial people, keyword brown skin monoracial people, are the majority. And when I'm talking about monoracial, I'm talking about like, a small admixture, like maybe 12%, 19%, something like that. And y'all act like they're like, I don't know, y'all act like y'all kind of single them out the same way y'all do to light skinned people, because we're both minorities.
Also, whatever happened to being brown skin? Like, that is a thing. Black people come in all different shades. Literally, what is wrong with being brown skin? Why is it now this thing of, oh, either you're light skin or you're dark skin? Because I don't think y'all understand how much that is contributing to the erasal, however, of actual dark skin, dark skin people. Like, why are y'all calling Megan Thee Stallion dark skin? Why does Summer Walker think that she's dark skin? Like, yeah, you're darker, but not dark enough to pull colorism. You know good and well colorism is not your problem. You know it's not. You literally know it's not. When I talk about dark-skinned artists, I'm not talking about SZA. SZA is brown. Damn near got a golden undertone. Like, she's brown. I'm not talking about Megan Thee Stallion when I talk about dark skin. Megan Thee Stallion's not fucking dark skin. I'm talking about Normani. I am talking about No Name. I am talking about Flo Milli. I am talking about Amaretta. That is dark skin. And yes, there's a spectrum, but it's like I just really hate that card like be getting pulled like, oh, it's because you dark. Because I'm like, what do y'all think that people who have even deeper shades than that go through? Because once the wintertime hits, those people are light skinned. What do y'all feel about the people who are dark skinned literally all the time?
That is the majority of the black community. So I feel like I don't understand why people are playing all these games. Like, y'all don't be understanding what somebody says when somebody calls somebody light skin or dark skin. Like, why do we have to pretend like Normani is like super dark skin when you literally have people in the United States who are either first generation African or even in like Gullah, Geechee. You don't even gotta go there. You could just go to the South, Mississippi. There's a lot of dark skinned people who are very dark skinned.
And this is another thing I find strange that I've wanted to point out for a long time that I haven't. Why is it that in the last few years, the representation of what is dark skin has only become African people? Specifically, usually either like West African people or East African people. I find that really interesting because there are a lot of African American dark skinned people that I feel like that's not as much of a representation anymore. I don't know. People could disagree with me, but I don't know. I definitely feel like dark-skinned African Americans who have a dark-skinned African American experience, I do feel like that's not as highlighted as you would think. And I feel like the representation of what's dark skin here in the United States is kind of like an African person when there are actually like a lot of African Americans, like my brother, even if they have like a mixed background, you know, regardless of their admixture degrees or not, it is a lot. Even in the Caribbean and in Latin America, a lot of dark-skinned people, a lot of monoracial dark-skinned people. But that's usually not used as a representation of dark-skinned people in general. So, I don't know. I just kind of thought about that randomly. But I've kind of noticed that, like, we're like the dark-skinned African Americans. And I'm talking about people who have, like, ancestry in the South. And not even a specific, like, ethnic group like Gullah, Geechee, anything like that. Even Haitian, Jamaicans, you know what I mean? Like, if you're from the Caribbean, you know there's a lot of very richly hued people in the Caribbean. You know, like I said, where my family's from, the Bahamas, Brazil, like all over South America and the Caribbean, Trinidad, you know, people mixed with Indian, they're very dark with straight hair. I mean, Panama, all over the place. When you become a globalized people in a globalized world, you don't feel as isolated. In a video that I did almost 3 years ago, I believe it's called Aggression and Scapegoating Light-Skinned Women. I'm going to have it linked in the description box below. But anyway, I did this video about like almost 3 years ago now, and I cited a study that literally did a skin tone comparison amongst African American men. And I have the study cited,
a comparison of skin tone discrimination among African American men from 1995 to 2003, and I'll be reading from the abstract section. And so in this section is like the intro, so they talk about multiple different groups. They don't just talk about black men, and all of these studies will be in the description box below. Later research suggested that African Americans usually preferred skin tones that were similar to their own shade, while other studies indicated they strongly preferred lighter skin tones regardless of their own shade. For the most part, psychologically, African Americans who appeared close to the average medium brown skin tone, i.e. a prototypical shade, seemed to be more protected in their racial identity and were the least stigmatized by African Americans. In contrast, those with skin tones on the extreme ends of the spectrum, i.e. very dark and very light, experienced a lower sense of mastery or felt less attached to other African Americans. Overall, results of the study were variable. Although light skin tones may have been idealized, medium-skinned persons may have been more protected in their racial identity and attachment to African Americans. Thus, skin tone bias can be complex, simultaneously serving as an advantage or a disadvantage depending on the social context.
And that was a study done amongst black men. So if that was a study amongst men, we can only assume how it is for black women. So I'm not being, trying to take the heat off me as a light-skinned woman by pointing out that there is a dominant skin tone of black people, and one of the issues that light-skinned women as well as dark-skinned women are complaining about stem from them being a minority. It's not, light-skinned women are terrorizing dark-skinned women because they're so insecure, or dark-skinned women are terrorizing light-skinned women because they're so jealous. No, I think that the situation is a lot more complicated and a lot more complex, and there's a lot more moving pieces to this than we're willing to let on. And I'm going to be honest with you, there wouldn't be any reason to even signify or point out that people are light skinned or dark skinned if you're not comparing it to an average. What's the point of pointing out that somebody's dark skinned or light skinned if you're not comparing them to an average look? So even the whole concept of there being a dark skin and light skin category, but then people trying to pretend like there's no middle point is silly there. So it's constant double talk. There can't be a minority group that you're saying is getting privileged if you're also saying that the dominant group also looks just like the minority group. Then there's no privilege then if everybody looks the same. Like, just like there isn't, if how is it that dark-skinned women for years were talking about colorism and their experience for years, brown-skinned women, I'm just going to be honest with you, a lot of brown-skinned women used to gaslight dark-skinned women. So I find it funny now that y'all are saying Normani is dark-skinned, and there's all these brown-skinned women who would have never called themselves dark-skinned 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and people can say I'm being petty for saying that. That's fucking true. It's fucking true. Any African American or black person who has paid attention to colorism for over 10 years knows what I'm saying is true right now. So I find it really interesting that now all of a sudden, now you guys are dark skinned. Now Normani's dark skinned. Now you're victims of light skinned women. Now you're being erased by biracials. But for years, when dark skinned people would talk about colorism or the negative comments that they would get from other black people, and if they're saying that they're getting these comments from all black people, it's impossible that they're just coming from light-skinned people. So then what's really going on here? So then how is it possible that now everybody's dark-skinned and only light-skinned people are colorists? You see, I feel like they keep changing the narrative to basically like kind of keep switching the goalposts to divert away from what the real issue is. The issue is that there is just a prominent hyperfixation and color struckness amongst people of African descent. It's not any specific skin tone's fault. There's not any one group that needs to be held accountable for that. It's a cohabitative, dysfunctional ideology in a relationship there, honestly.
Right? And I'm mentioning this because the narrative and that dynamic in the black community is often talked about like, oh, you just have this invasive species of these light-skinned and biracial people, and they just come in and their existence perpetuates all this colorism, and they say all these microaggressive things, and then it just messes with everybody's self-esteem. And then the occasional black male who's colorist will say something, but we still date them, but it's really the light-skinned people saying XYZ. Like, that is the dominant narrative. And that's another reason why I say I don't think that is fair, because that often leads to people being stereotyped a certain way. So as I've stated a lot of times in my channel, there's already these narratives and these stereotypes about light-skinned and mixed people in the black community. So when we're having these colorism conversations, they're always guided by these stereotypes, and it just doesn't even sound accurate, because like I stated earlier, light-skinned people and dark-skinned people are both a minority group in the black community in Black America. So if you're telling me that you have these singular biracial people who don't even have their own like social network or anything, it's going to be, first of all, the power imbalance right there shows that the dynamic is incorrect, because you have 5 brown skin to dark skin black people to 1 biracial or mixed person, yet we're supposed to believe that these people are coming in and causing all of this harm. Like the numbers don't even match up with the narrative. Like there's not even enough light-skinned people for the ratio amount of what y'all are even saying. So it's impossible that what y'all are saying are even correct. And so I always kept this scenario in my head, because I'm like, yo, this is really how a physical representation of how colorism plays out in the Black community. And it's the same thing when things happen to light-skinned women also. I talk about this too. It'd be everybody sitting up there kicking. It'd be other light-skinned women, Black male worshippers who are brown-skinned and dark-skinned, other Black males. They do these humiliation rituals to women of African descent, and they just weaponize certain aspects of your identity against you, whether it be that you're dark-skinned, whether it be that you're from another country, whether it be that you're biracial, whatever it may be. They just use these little things to pick at you, and the whole community sits back and kiki about it. But then they want to sit up there and scapegoat Black women, scapegoat biracial women. It's another reason why I be saying that it's every light-skinned woman for themselves in the Black community, because they know that as long as they're accommodating to the role that they're supposed to be playing, they're good. Even if it means, you know, throwing a friend under the bus or whatever. But you know, that's a whole nother scenario. When I even watch these videos of dark-skinned women online talking about their experiences, a lot of times, like, it's not even women that look like Normani. It's women that, I'm gonna be honest with you, it's women that look African. And that's another reason why I definitely can affirm that there's a huge connection between xenophobia and this colorism, because y'all devalue women of African descent. So the women that present the most African, y'all devalue them the most. And you know, I just really noticed that, like, it's the same thing for a few African guys too. And you know how when like dudes be playing the dozens and like they be roasting each other and things of that nature. I remember even overhearing Black American and Hispanic guys telling this very dark-skinned African dude saying that, oh, you're mad, black and ugly. Mad times. Mind you, I've never heard a light-skinned Black woman, mixed woman, Afro-Latin woman, non-Black Hispanic woman ever say anything close to that in person. I've never heard some shit like that come from a light-skinned or mixed woman ever. I've seen craziness online, but I've never seen something like that in person ever. But I can name numerous times when I have bear witness to Black men and men of African descent who are mixed as well, saying some very disgusting, very colorist things to dark-skinned people. So you cannot tell me that the men are not driving this issue. Where Black women need to be held accountable and where they go wrong, and where mixed women as well go wrong, is how you sitting up in that group a kikin, being basically being a bystander. You're a bystander and you're a willing participant by association. That's where Black women go wrong. But yeah, that's just why I kind of find it odd that we're constantly talking about Normani being like this, like, I don't know, representation or martyr of colorism, because like I mentioned in my stands video, I feel like there are women who are way darker than Normani, way more phenotypically African than Normani, that put in way more work and are way more consistent, that don't get nearly that level of advocacy. So it's just kind of strange to me, the whole Normani thing, especially with that being my perspective as well. Just, yeah, I just find that interesting. Also, you know, a lot of this is regional. So I'm in New York, where there's a very diverse range of different ethnic groups and phenotypes of people of African descent. You know, there's first generation West Africans, there's, you know, MGM African Americans, there's Afro Latinos, there's, you know, Jamaicans, there's literally everyone from everywhere. So that kind of plays a role into what my perspective would be also. But yeah, I've just definitely noticed that. I do think that there's, just like people want to keep bringing up like, oh, well, there's a difference between how a light-skinned person and a dark-skinned person will get treated, and a light-skinned person will never experience what XYZ person will experience. Okay, so I think it's also fair to say that not all brown-skinned and dark-skinned people experience maybe colorism, or any type of isms on the same axis on each other. And like I said, I've observed a lot of xenophobia and colorism from African Americans too. We know how the vast majority of African Americans look. The vast majority of African Americans do not look like Evelyn Lozada or, I don't know, do not look like Robin Dixon. The vast majority of African Americans look like Normani. So if the vast majority of African Americans look more like Normani, but there's a huge xenophobia issue between Africans and African Americans, and there's a connection between the xenophobia and the colorism, I don't understand. I think that I'm onto something with that point there. And also, if you look at who's leading the charge on colorism conversations, and me and a lot of other content creators that talk about these topics have mentioned this, a lot of these women who talk about colorism are African women. It's not really African American women that look like Normani that are leading the charge on this. They're starting to talk about this more, but African American women who look like Normani, or even that are darker than Normani, weren't really the main people talking about colorism like that. And I'm not even saying that they weren't experiencing it. I definitely think that there's a lot of different places that these women are speaking from when they're speaking about their experiences as dark-skinned women. I think that xenophobia is a huge part of it, and being a black person from another country who does look different, who does have a different culture, I think that that plays a part into it too. And I think that that's why you see women who are West African having these conversations, but you don't see a lot of Sukianas having this conversation. I don't know, maybe I'm being incorrect about this, but I don't really see a lot of dark-skinned African American women with at least dominant pages that talk about colorism or dominant narratives. I could be incorrect, I could be wrong, but that's just what I observe. But one of the reasons why I don't agree with that narrative is because, and I've kind of mentioned this in other videos too, is that I feel like dark-skinned women get stereotyped in the same way as light-skinned women, in the sense that people put personality traits or like mentalities onto us, and then they project that onto us. And again, that tends to lead the colorism conversation, or be a steering force. So for example, with dark-skinned women, there's this constant narrative that, oh, they're jealous, oh, they're saying something because they're mad, oh, they're saying something because they want this feature, because they're, whatever it is. Like, that's the narrative. As where with like light-skinned women, it's like, oh, they're stuck up or jealous, or no, more so stuck up, or think that they're better, you know what I mean? And then that leads and guides people's perspectives about the topic, or about the situation. So I don't want that done to me, so I'm not gonna project that or do that to other black women as well, just because they're darker hued, because it gets irritating to me when it's done to light-skinned women. And I just have to be honest with you, as a light-skinned woman who's been light-skinned my whole life, I've had a lot of issues, and I just have to be honest with you, I've had a lot of issues with monoracial brown-skinned African American women who are from the same ethnicity as me, who look similarly to my mom and my aunts. I've had a lot of issues with them. I'm not going to sit up here and suddenly pretend and call them dark skinned just for the sake of argument and the sake of conversation. I don't think that that's fair. Yeah, I don't think that's fair. And also, and one reason why I don't think that's fair is because I don't think their issue with me was rooted in anything with their skin color. I think that it was about something they're projecting onto me, as where when people make that narrative like, oh, this dark skinned woman is hating on this light skinned girl because she's jealous, they're trying to project the narrative that they hate or are insecure about their skin color, which you can't make that analysis without like having enough information. You know what I mean? Just like you can't make an analysis about how a light skinned woman feels or is thinking about something without proper analysis and proper assessment of her mentality and ideas. You can't just make one assessment about that. So that being said, I don't think that is fair. So I don't even think that it was like, oh, these brown skinned women were like, they hate their skin color, they were jealous and da-da-da. I don't even think it was anything of that. I think that it was like, they just, you probably didn't like something about my personality, and the way I look just didn't help. That's a lot of the issues I ran into growing up. I don't even feel like it was like, oh, they were hating on me because I was light skinned or mixed. No, they probably didn't like something about my personality or my mentality, and it's like, I already don't like that about you, and then on top of you, I already don't like the way you look because I can't trust you. I don't know what the fuck you are. The niggas is flocking to you. I don't fucking like you. So I think that the way I look was probably lower on the list of reasons, but did it have something to do with it? Yeah. For example, I just did a story time about that situation when I was working in a retail store, and that girl was talking about me and threatened to slap me. That girl was far from dark skinned. That girl was not dark skinned at all. That girl was definitely brown skinned, and she's over here talking about she slaps light skinned bitches. So I'm sorry, but forgive me. I'm not gonna play these reindeer games with other black people and suddenly pretend that being brown skinned and light skinned are the same thing. And I'm not going to pretend like I don't know how the dominant group of black Americans look, and like I don't know and have not had numerous experiences since I was a little girl. Because when I was in that whole fitting room situation with my coworker who was weird as hell, who was talking shit about me, no dark-skinned women were involved in that situation. So what y'all not about to do is play games and try to still play these light-skinned, dark-skinned scenarios and try to triangulate us against each other. We see what's going on. And again, light-skinned and dark-skinned people are both minorities. So the math is just not mathing with these scenarios when you really think about it.
And a few weeks ago, I did a live stream reacting to the situation between Ice Spice and Cleopatra. And I was talking about this work scenario I had with this girl in my job where she was being lightist/colorist towards me. Watch the live stream just to get context of the story, because you won't understand what I'm about to say if you have not watched that live. Of course, I'll have it linked in the description box. But anyway, when that situation happened, like, that situation was like literally, it's a great example of what I'm talking about with this rant, because like she literally not only was she weaponizing like the typical like stereotypes and everything against me and everything, she definitely was using the fact that I was the only African American girl there that looked like that. Because no dark-skinned women were involved in that situation. No African women were involved in that. We was all African American and Caribbean, and all in like the browner skin range. I was literally the only light-skinned, clearly phenotypically mixed presenting person in there. And she definitely like used that. And that was not the first time that something like that has happened to me. And if it's not the skin color, then it's the ethnicity thing. Then it's them saying I'm Spanish when I'm half Hispanic and both of my parents are black people. So you're weaponizing my culture against me as well as my phenotype to get other black women to turn against me. And like I said, I've had that experience with other African American girls before who were not dark skinned. So that is why personally on this channel, I will never push that narrative that always just these dark skinned women hating on light skinned women and they're just terrorizing us and da 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 da. I'm gonna be honest with you, that's just not my experience with dark skinned women growing up. Have I had beef with certain dark skinned women? Have I had my little dust ups? Yeah, just like I've had beef and dust ups with other light skinned women and with brown skinned women, with Hispanic women that were not black. I beef with pretty much almost every race, honestly. So I'm not gonna just pin that experience on dark skinned women and women narrative, because I don't think that it's just that cut and dry. Just like I don't think it's that cut and dry that light skinned people are just the only people being colorist. I don't think that that's fair. In fact, it was my dark skinned Senegalese friend that's the one that came and said, you know, this bitch is talking shit about you to all the other black girls. It was my dark skinned friend who said that. The other African American girls that was brown skinned wasn't holding me down. The other light skinned women wasn't holding me down. They didn't say nothing. they was sitting there listening and, you know, trying to take a neutral stance. So I'm just saying, like, things are not always as cut and dry, and we definitely have narratives that we use in, you know, growing up that we use to kind of keep these confirmation bias ideas going, and that can be really harmful too, because there's not really real healing coming from that. We're just staying in this certain mindset, and I'm just not comfortable with the narrative that is most like, you know, always trying to say that it's only like only dark skinned women even saying these things about light skinned women, like even online, like with a lot of this colorism ink narrative. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you, a lot of this, even a lot of the stuff that is said about biracial women and light skinned women, I'm gonna be honest with you, a lot of that is literally said by brown skinned women in defense of dark skinned women. Like, there are a lot of brown skinned women who will bash light skinned women under the guise of defending dark skinned women. Like, they're not even, if you really even look at a lot of these channels that they might here and there say something negatively about mixed people, they're not necessarily colorism channel, but they have smoke for like biracials and stuff like that. They're usually like brown skinned African American women. A lot of these women are not even like that dark skinned themselves. So I just think that it's a little like, Yeah, I think that there's a lot of intellectual dishonesty that's had in these conversations, and it's used to just stereotype each group.
And I wanted to clear this up, or I guess you can say clarify this, about my story time video that I made about my Ghanaian friend who made that scenario up about the flight attendant, and she also made some comments about Tyla. So just for context, if you want to understand the next part of this, the next part that I'm going to talk about, you have to have watched that video. So I'll have it linked in the description box below. So if you haven't watched that video, go watch that first, then watch this. So anyway, because you won't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I don't know if my intentions were clear with that video, or like what the scenario I was trying to really set up was. So ultimately, one of the issues that I had with what my Ghanaian friend was saying was that we were there to talk about like experiences with racism, anti-blackness that we had experienced while traveling in Latin America, but she took it as an opportunity to like complain about this older flight attendant, and she like projected all of these like basically light-skinned stereotypes onto her, and like made up this whole scenario that she, you know, I don't know, that she was favoring only the light-skinned people. It was really weird. I'm just gonna be honest with you, it was just really weird and like clearly a projection, like, and that's kind of an issue too that I have with this, and why I get irritated when people are trying to make it seem like oh, it's not a big deal, it doesn't even matter who's considered light skinned, or it doesn't even matter, you know, who's brown and this and this and that. And it's like, it does matter if you're online almost every single day stereotyping and making up lies about a specific group or background of people, and then stereotyping them as such ways, and then in real life, some of y'all do act funny towards us. So it's like, why would I sit up here and not push back on propaganda being pushed back against people who look like me? That doesn't make any sense. False propaganda at that. Like, damn, at least stereotype us about some shit we actually doing. Like, if you want some shit to complain about mixed people, I'll give you some shit. Like, I was raised by them. Like, but anyway, like, I do acknowledge, and like looking back on that situation, I do acknowledge that, like I said, my friend she is Ghanaian, and I mean, she grew up in the States, but she is Ghanaian, and I know that like black people from a different country may have a different perception of skin tone, especially African people. They tend to have a tendency to call people light skin who in the States we would not call light skin. So I do understand that. So I feel like it could have been part of that as well, but that just further plays into what I'm trying to stress here. Like, you know, basically, like, I'm sorry, I have to be honest with you, they're doing a lot of crying colorism wolf and saying, oh, this light-skinned person said this to me, this light-skinned person did that to me. Mind you, it'd be no receipts, it'd be straight up hearsay, and then they market it out as being fact. But then it's like, why is it that we should just accept that as fact, but then if we try to say, well, no, this person is not light-skinned, then y'all turn around and say, oh, well, skin tone is, you know, up for perception, and it's different people have perception. Okay, so why can't we say that with these colorism scenarios too? Because you could say that that's up for perception also, because that woman did not say anything about that girl's skin color or race. She did not mistreat her either compared to other people. That girl projected her ideas about colorism onto that flight attendant, and she was projecting her ideas and her issues with light-skinned people onto that flight attendant. That's the problem. And then you're going around spewing people saying, oh, this woman treated me this way, this woman treated me this way. Meanwhile, that's not how the scenario went down. So now you spreading this idea to other people, and then they're believing it too. That is the problem. And then the other problem is that it's the people who actually look like that that's gonna bear the brunt of that. That's the issue. Like, and that's why I'm saying, stop playing coy like y'all don't know who y'all tend to consider to be light skinned. Like, I'm really tired of the nonsense. And just to further stress this point, and how I know that this girl was just projecting her negative attitudes and ideas about light-skinned people onto this flight attendant, is because later on when we were talking about Tyla and we were having the debate about so-called the term colored, she was getting all hot and bothered and worked up because Tyla identifies as mixed. And then when somebody asked if Tyla was light-skinned, this girl was sitting up here talking about, yeah, Tyla's light-skinned. Mind you, Tyla's like probably a few tans away from being that girl's skin tone, because she wasn't even that dark herself. And like I'm saying again, she's Ghanaian, so she could genuinely see Tyla as light skin. I'm sorry, I do not see why people see that are saying that she's light skinned. Y'all are saying she's light skinned because she's thin with thin features and she identifies as mixed. And there's even studies done about how the mere knowledge or being told that somebody is a mixed race or from another country has been shown to increase somebody's attraction to them. So has been shown to make somebody view them as more attractive. So if we apply that to skin tone politics, why can't we assume that it goes the same thing for stereotypes as well? If you're more likely to view a mixed person as attractive because you know that they're mixed, how can't we hypothesize that you're also, if you have negative views about mixed people, you're more likely to view them in a certain way or view them through a certain lens in order to stereotype them in a certain way as well? Because in that whole scenario, she was stereotyping Tyla in the same way that a lot of people in the States stereotype specifically like biracial people, and they always connect that to colorism, also T light skin sentiments in that. So a lot of these narratives are driven by stuff. So in my opinion, I'm just gonna be honest with you, I think that there are a lot of people who, when they view or they know that a brown skinned person is mixed, they will say, oh, that person's light skinned. And I don't really care, but again, I do care if the basis of you saying that is rooted in a negative outlook on that group of people. So you sitting up here basically saying that Tyla's a snake, saying that Tyla is entitled, saying that Tyla is a racial imposter, saying all this negative stuff about Tyla, just like you were saying all that negative stuff and attributing all these negative attributes to the flight attendant, and both of these two women, you went out your way to say that they're light skinned. Why you gotta use all these stereotypes and talk negatively about this flight attendant and call her light skinned just to make your point across when it's not even true? So I just find that shit to be mad weird, and I think it's very, as a public, we're getting to see how obvious that is done towards dark skinned women, but when it's done towards light skinned women, people don't recognize it in the other way, and then we're gaslit. But anyways, get in the comment section and let me know what your perspective surrounding this topic is. If you have a similar or different one to me, I'd love to hear it. Thanks for all the support, and I'll see you in the next podcast. Bye bye.